everybody. Thank you very much for joining me here today. This is Paul Taubman with 9.connect. You are in the right place. If you are here for our 6 considerations of the Concord Pro / Altium 365 setup here today. So really glad that you are joining us here. I see some familiar faces in the panel over here. I want to welcome you back for those people who are who've participated in our webinars in the past. If you're new to us, also want to welcome you here as well. So a few housekeeping notes before we begin. There will be time for questions, I believe. The practice runs, I was able to get it, I think, within an hour so that we can answer a couple questions. I suspect there'll be quite a few of them. If you don't mind, please write those questions in the questions panel, and we'll take a look at those. If we don't get to them, then, and that there's enough of them, then I will certainly put together a Q&A, which, as we've done in prior webinars. Please do be specific. If you say, hey, what do you mean by that or this? If you speak what I call in pronoun, it's going to be really hard to understand what you are referring to. So if you can be specific with the questions, we really appreciate it. One other thing, just kind of a disclaimer here, not a legal disclaimer, just an understanding that what we are showing here today is what we have learned through, I'd say, mistakes and through experiences and through triumphs as well. We've worked with a lot of customers, and there's no two configurations that, quite frankly, are the exact same. Everybody has a different way of doing it, and so just keep that or take that into consideration with what you're seeing here today. So with that being said, let's, if you don't, well, before I get into the polling questions, let me show you what our objectives are. We are going to consider the details for revision schemes, and by the way, this will be the order in which I'm going to do it. We're going to talk about revision schemes. We'll talk about the life cycle schemes, and I will go into a little bit of detail about the differences between these two. People do get life cycle and revision a little bit confused, and I will hopefully give you a solid example that will remove any confusion that you might have between these two things. We'll talk about folder structure and the unique IDs, component types, and then lastly, we'll talk about the permissions. So those are the things that we will talk about in this particular order. So before we do that, I'd like to get a little more information about you. So I'm going to open our first polling question. I'm just wondering if you are using any of these products that Altium has made for library and project management. All right, so the results are in. Hopefully you can see those on your screen. So almost 50% of you are not using anything. So I suppose that what you're trying to do is do a little bit of some exploring to see what's out there. And hopefully after you see what there is today, this will sharpen either your interest or you have a better idea of where you want to go with this type of management. I do have one other polling question, and this will probably be more for those people who are using this. What are you using it for? Because there are different reasons for people using it. Some people use it only for libraries, some use it for projects. Some people, especially for the Altium 365, they use it strictly for collaboration. So if you don't mind, let's take a moment with that poll. All right, so interesting again. So I kind of expected that those who gave about the 50% mark for not using it would come back and say have not used it, which makes sense here. So most people are using it for both libraries and projects, which is interesting to me. I have a tendency to think that it was just primarily for the libraries, but of course that tends to be my world more than the project side of it. So 11% of you are using it for libraries only. And then what's also interesting is for the collaboration. I thought that the collaboration element might be a little bit of more of a sell point for those people who are trying to get into it, but interesting statistics nevertheless. So thank you very much for providing that information to us, and hopefully you found this interesting as well. What I want to bring up here is a list of the products that Altium provides, and the reason I want to do this is because some of the things I'm going to talk about you may not have access to. So these are the various products. There's Concord Pro. Concord Pro is a server base, so you purchase it, you put it on your company server. There's Altium 365, which is hosted on the AWS cloud, which through Altium, so you don't have to worry about any of the server setup. There's also Altium 365 Pro. This is a paid-for version of it, as opposed to the Altium 365, which you get automatically with your subscription. The Pro does give you a few things here, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And by the way, when it comes to Nexus, just as a side note, yes, Altium still supports the legacy company server-based systems, but they are moving into a cloud-based Nexus, so you may see something of that nature in the future. I'm not sure how they're going to advertise that, but that is coming about. In fact, we know of a customer already who is making use of this. And the reason I bring this up is because for Altium 365, if you have not paid for the Pro version of it, what you're going to see today, you will not have access to lifecycle schemes, you will not have access to revision schemes, and you will not have access to the component templates. But the rest of the things you'll see here today, you will definitely have access to, and you may still want to stick around because these, especially directory structure and item IDs, plays a really important role in all of this here. So that's what we've got here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually jump out of the PowerPoint presentation because I'm going to now go into Altium and show you what we've got here in real time. It wasn't my intent here on making this a PowerPoint presentation, but to show you what's really going on here. So what you do see is I have my Altium up and running right now. I am connected into 9.connects. This is the Pro version that we happen to have on Altium 365. Whatever method you're using, whether it's Nexus, Concord Pro, Altium 365, this is the way you're always going to access through it. So as long as you have let's say whatever we'll call it a platform, whatever the platform is, as long as you've got it up over here, you should be able to see what's going on within that product. So the way we can do that, there's two ways to basically see the information that is in that product that you own. It's either going to be through the components panel, but the one that I like to use and the one that you see right now is what's called the Explorer panel. And the way you get to the Explorer panel is through the panels at the bottom right corner, and then you would make sure that you enable the Explorer. Now, if you aren't logged in or you don't see your particular server, the product that your company has purchased, then you're not really going to see anything in the Explorer panel. But since I am logged into it, I have full access to it at this point. So let's take kind of a quick moment to look here. And what I really want to show you is what I'll call the end product, because this is what everybody wants. They envision this system, and it's possible, and I mean, it's very possible. People do it all the time. What they want is a system that says, look, I've got all my libraries located here. I've got my projects down here. Any of my templates are all set up over here, and so on and so forth. And within my libraries, because that's where we're going to really focus today, I have them all organized and within a particular category. If I click on them, actually the bad example, let's take resistors here. But when I click on it, it's all organized. It looks really good. And it's easy to see what I have within the library system. So it's all there and it's up and running. Now, the one that I'm using right now is the one that Altium provides by default. And I encourage you to install it. Even if you don't use it, it gives you some really good examples of how to set this up. And as we go along, you're going to see that there are some little twists and turns that you've got to be aware of. If you've set this up before and you went running with it, and then you kind of fell into a couple of the pitfalls, then you probably know there were some things that you needed to address up front. And that's what we're specifically going to talk about here. But it's a really great example to look at. This is kind of our general recommendation we have for customers who are looking to set things up where you have all of your components. You also have your models. And those models are in specific folders. And you may have even noticed that the folders have a specific type or association with them. I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. One thing you do have to remember about these products that Altium sells, whether it's Concord Pro, A365, Nexus, and so on and so forth, you have to remember that it is a component-based system, not a symbol-based system. So what do we mean by that? Well, a symbol-centric library is one of those is where the symbol contains everything. It contains the links, it contains its graphic, and it contains the metadata or parametric data. That's not true in these products like Concord Pro and Altium 365. You have what's called a component file. And there it is. And now we click on these here and we get a preview of each one of these. And so what we see here is, for example, this one that I picked here, this happens to be a component file that has this particular set of metadata, again, parameters, depending on what you want to call it, it's the same thing. But that's associated to the file here, but it also has links. It has links to a symbol and has a link to a footprint. And so there you can see over here, we've got our footprint, we have our symbol. We also can see what kind of files they have associated here. Now, these are the graphical representations, but if you look here under what they call the ID, you can see there's 3 files associated with that as well. So you have your component template, and you also have your footprint and your symbol here. These are all separate files that this component file links into. That's the idea with this, and the folder structure will assist with that over here on the left side. So we've got that. What I want to talk about too is that if you look in this preview with all of these columns over here, now I've set up a few of these and I probably have to turn on a few more, so bear with me if I don't see it over here. You'll see something that's called the revision ID. In fact, let me go to inductors because I already have it set up here. So if we go to inductors, we can see we have a revision ID, we have an item ID, and we have a revision. So the item ID is a unique ID. We'll talk about this a little bit more as to some recommendations that you may want to consider. But the revision ID, oddly enough, is a combination of an item ID and the actual revision number. We can set up the revision to be how we want it to be, and I'll show some of the options that you have for that. But once it's associated with that file, it's there for the file's existence. And what you're seeing here really is kind of interesting. So you take the item ID and you take the revision, you combine them together, they call it the revision ID. So that's what you're seeing over here. With that being said, there's a couple of other things that we'll talk about, but what I want to do is I want to jump into these elements here. So as I mentioned with the objectives, there's revisions and there's life cycle. And here, by the way, they don't call it life cycle, they call it revision state. These all happen to be in what's the draft mode. Now there's one that's in prototype, but that's one that I played with here. So let's do the following. Let's jump into the revision, understand how that works. We'll talk about the revision, the life cycle, how we get that working, and then I'll show you what the difference is here between the two of them. So let's get going with that. For the revisions, if I want to establish a revision system for any type of file, I can do that through the preferences. And by the way, it assumes that I'm also an administrator as well, which I am in this case. So I'm going to go to the top right corner. I'm going to click on the cog. And here I'm going to go under system, and within the part, well, under system, actually it's not the right one, is data management. So let's go under data management here, and I'm going to go under servers. So the active server I've got right now is the one for 9.connects, and I'm going to go into its properties. And here in the properties, I can get to things like the revision and the life cycle. Now, oddly enough, they don't call it revision schemes, they call it naming schemes. So just be aware of that, but here it is, here's the naming scheme. And when we bring it up, you can see a bunch of schemes that Altium's already provided for you. And by the way, feel free to use them. They're perfectly viable schemes if you like the way they're set up. Now, there are some caveats and catches here. So for example, this level 1 revision scheme that you see over here has already been used in the example that Altium provides for you if you opt to use it. And you'll notice something over here. I'll say this revision naming scheme cannot be modified or deleted because it's currently in use. So once you've created a scheme and once you've given it to a file, that scheme gets locked. You cannot make a change. So this is one of those gotchas that you have to be aware of, that you want to get the revision naming scheme correct, because once you apply it, you don't have a lot of options to change it. Now, granted, you could create a new scheme, and for all new files moving forward, you could use that new scheme, but you can't retroactively fix the revision scheme that you may have for an existing file that was already assigned an existing scheme. So what do we have over here? Let's take a look at this. So here's one where I can't change it. I can't do any of the drop downs, but I can easily clone it and create a new one. So let's hit the clone button here, and I can give it whatever name I want. So you do want to be a little bit descriptive about this, because when you are setting up new files, it's going to say, well, what revision scheme do you want? And so you want to make sure that if you're going to use it for a specific reason, that you can easily find it in the list. So if I was going to do something, maybe this would be like 9.connects component, or better yet, library, because I could use this one for symbols and footprints as well. So let's say NDC library revision scheme. And then the number of ID levels over here, you can have up to 3 of them. And for certain files, it makes a lot of sense to maybe have a little more granularity in the revision. In other cases, especially for components, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But just to show this here, so if I went to a 3 level, you can see that I can have up to 3 different levels of revision. So when I work on a file, whether it's new or I modify it, and I push it to the server, then it will say, well, okay, well, which part of this revision do you want to bump? Now, if it's a level 1, it just knows to bump it. But if it's something that's got more than one level, then it's going to say, well, is this a model change? Is this a prototype change or a revision change? Or however you set this up. So the captions over here are based on what you need. So let's just go to a level 2, because this one is I'm a little more familiar with this. Maybe a level 1 here is a major, and the base here, instead, I'll call this one a minor. So I might have a major minor system, which a lot of people use for their projects. Okay, so I can give whatever caption I want, but again, that is an important caption, because when I push this into the server, it's going to ask me, well, which do you want? Do you want to change the major? Or do you want to change the minor? Now, another really cool feature, and I'm glad they put this in here because this would be really an effort if they didn't put it in. At the bottom over here, they will show you a preview of how it's going to look. Now, the word item is really the item ID because that's normally what we associate with the revision. We don't put it to quote unquote file name. There is a name for the component or a name for the symbol or the footprint, but we really don't call that the file name. There's an item ID, and that's what they're showing over here is that if you have an ID here, how do you want this revision to look visually, basically, once you've associated with it? So you have some things like separators. So if I want it, right now we've got this item dash here. I'm going to try something. Let's see if this works. It's a Control-1 for this tool that I'm using. Yeah, it brings us in there a little closer. Cool. So hopefully you can see this. I know it's a little grainier, but I figured it'd be a little bit better than what it was right now. So you can see that there's a dash over here. Yeah, unfortunately it puts me in a drawing mode, so I'm going to escape out. Sorry. Over here, I can click and say I don't want the dash, and you'll see it'll disappear. If I want a dash afterwards, I can click on this one. And now it's got the dash. If I want something like a dot next to between the major and the minor here, I can do this. So you can play with this until you see the way that you want it to be set up. You also have some options over here as well. You have the numeric, you have the alphanumeric, and there's even the standard for the Y1435M, which I believe is for zoning. So there are, I think for military purposes, you can actually zone the area that's been changed. I have not played with it much. I was looking at the spec very recently, but that's what this is supposed to represent here. So you do have some options as to how you want to set this up. And hopefully it looks pretty straightforward to you. If you're going to set this up, now for components, I recommend a very simple revision 1 scheme. And again, you can use the one that Altium already provides. If you're going to do something with projects, then either come up with one that's going to work best for you if you don't have a formal system. But if you do have a formal system that is being provided by the company, because in the end your projects have to make their way into some formal document control system, then you may want to see if you can set this up to be similar to what the company standard is. So there you go. So once you save it and you create a file, then you can tell it what scheme you want to use. So that's the revision scheme. I'm going to cancel here because I'm not going to save this. I am going to discard it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into properties and going to talk more about life cycles here for a few moments. So let's go into life cycles. Now there's 2 different ways to do life cycles, by the way. There we go. This is the classic way of doing it if you're going to do it through Altium Designer. There is also a web interface as well that you can go into. And the web interface has a pretty cool drafting, I'll call it a drawing tool. So you can actually draw it to make it look like a state machine. And if you're familiar with state machines, that's effectively what you're doing with the lifecycle definitions. You start off with a certain set of states, and then you try to determine what is going to get you from one state to another. In fact, they call them states. Now, this is actually a pretty complex lifecycle definition over here. This one not only has states associated with it, it also has stages associated with it. Now, my personal opinion, unless you're working for a major company that does have, reliability concerns, like, if you're building a car, for example, then I could see something of this nature over here. But if you're trying to do something that's a little simpler, you could use something like the one that Altium defaults to, like the component lifecycle one here, where you don't have all these different stages, you just have these various states that it goes through as that file progresses through its purpose. And really, that's what it's trying to do here. Now, there is some similarities to revisions, whereas in revisions, you cannot delete it and a revision cannot be modified. However, a lifecycle definition also cannot be deleted once it's in use, but it can be modified, which is kind of a good thing, because if you need to make some changes to this that's not really working for you, then it really won't impact it too much. Because let's say, for instance, you don't like having a prototyping stage, you can remove the prototyping stage. And if something's already in draft or it's in production, it's not going to have a monumental impact on that here. So what do you need to do to create these things? It's really simple, actually. You just right click and you add a state. So it'll ask you what the new state is. I'll just say example here, just for our purposes here. And will it be visible in the panels? Will it be allowed to be used in designs? And this is important too, because there may be states where, hey, this is not going to be allowed to be used in a design. So it will prevent that, it will prevent it from being used in a design if this is disabled. Let's press OK here. And then from there, you can always add in a transition. And then the transition state, you give it a certain name. And also the menu entry text is really important as well, because it's going to prompt you. If you're going to say, well, I want to bump the revision, well, how do you want it to be, how do you want it to be stated so that you know to bring it to the next revision here? And so that's how you can do this. There are some controls that you can have regarding the permissions of this. What I don't want you to do is confuse permissions with approvals. If you're interested in things like approvals, that's actually workflow. Workflow is a part of Nexus. So if you come into here and you're saying, oh, cool, I can do using approvals, as I have found, it won't work. So there are hooks for this, but it has to be through straight up permissions. And I'll talk about permissions at the end here of the presentation. So just be aware of that. So I'm just going to take an example over here. You can see that under the draft, which is where you're going to start, you'll notice that there are two options. So if I'm in the draft mode and I want to promote this or move it to another state, let's say, the way this is set up is I've got two options. Either I can move it to prototyping or I can move it to obsolete. Now, if I'm in the obsolete state here, one thing that's really important is that you don't want to have any state that you can't escape, right? So think again like a state machine. Most of us are electrical engineers. If you learn anything about the state machines, you never have a state that you can't escape. And so if you have one that's even obsolete, you may want to be able to restore it. And if you restore it, then in this case here, the next state after that is going to push it back into draft. So it's a pretty straightforward concept to put these things together. You can change the colors, you can give it the names you want, and you can set this up accordingly to the way you would want things to flow. One other piece of advice I will give you is don't create a ton of states. If, for example, you start off with, hey, someone built this part and then upon review, we can make use of it, then don't have a prototype stage. It's kind of like, okay, I create this draft and I leave it in there, and then someone would have to promote it to prototype, and they're the ones who are reviewing it, and if they like it, then they're going to push it into production. Well, then they've got to go in twice to do this, because you can't jump from draft to production the way this is set up. So don't create more states than what you think is necessary, so that you don't create a lot of work within the tool itself. So let's take a look at this, because it brings up that bigger question. I'm going to press yes again to discard it, and I'm going to cancel out of here. That nagging question of, well, what's really the difference between the two of them here? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this example, and you can see I've already moved it to a prototyping stage. So if I wanted to move this to production, right, then it's just a matter of me right-clicking on this, and I'm going to say operations, and I'm going to change the state. And in the state over here, because of the life cycle that's already been associated with this, you'll notice that the next step over here is to either roll it, or either put it to obsolete, roll it back to draft, or make it production. So that's the way this has been set up. So I'm going to say I'm going to move it to production. I'm going to hit process, and it's going to ask me a note. So I'm just going to say for demonstration purposes. But you should have a very legitimate reason as to why this was. So if you had approved it, then say this was approved. That's why, and the reason why this is important, you'll see why this is important in just a second. But every time I make these changes, then if I go into my life cycle over here, it gets recorded. So you can see that should have been recorded. Let's see. I got to click on the right one. There we go. So you can see now that the Rev 3 here was started off in draft. Here's its date. And then when it got promoted through, I could see the commentary that was used over here. Now, what if I got to make a change to it? Okay, so let's say I'm going to go into this, I'm going to change. I'm going to right click and I'm going to edit this. And this is going to bring up what's called the component editor. So if you're new to this, this is a little bit different from what library stuff you may have done in the past. So in the past, you would have opened up the schematic editor and start from there. But again, we're not symbol centric, we're component centric. So as a result, we're seeing the component editor. And in the component editor, we see our parametric data. We have this up here, which shows our link to an existing symbol and our link. And by the way, we can have multiple links to additional footprints here as well. You can only have one symbol link, but you can have multiple links to footprints. And if you have a SPICE simulation model, you can add that in here as well. You got your part choices, you can add them in here. And even the advanced settings, I'm going to kind of mention a few things in the advanced settings. I wish Altium, I wish they would make this kind of more permanent, because it's kind of important to take a look at. You can see there's an ID. I'll talk about this in a moment, but notice you cannot change the ID. It's really important to note. So the folder in which it exists in, but the template here as well. So this is the component template that initially drove this. So you can make changes thereafter, but this was the template that helped create this part. And then there's also this thing called type. It really should be called a component type. And we'll talk a little bit more about why you want to set this type here. It's a very simple thing to do, but it really does help Altium with its search mechanisms. The interesting part is I don't really have to make any changes. I just need to push this to the server. But let's say I made some change to one of the parameters over here. In the projects panel, I'm going to right click. And I'm just going to do one little tangent here because I think it's important. There's a difference between save and there's save to server. What save does is that when I open this up here, what Altium doesn't want the user to do is to deal with the file management local to their drive. The intention is to get this open so you can do the work necessary and push it up into either Concord Pro or Altium 365. Right? So the idea is they don't want this stuff to necessarily be saved off, because you start saving this stuff locally, what are you going to do with it? You're going to go rogue at some point. You're going to start using the local stuff, which was not the intention of the system. So they have saved it. If I save it, it's only because I want to get back to this at some point later. Maybe it's late in the day and I started this, but you know what? I need to get to this tomorrow. So if I just do a save, it will save it. And when I open up Altium the next day, guess what? It's going to be there. It'll actually show up in the projects panel. Until you until you save it to server or you discard the local changes, it's going to be there every single time. In fact, when I opened it this morning, I realized I left two of them open. I had to discard both of them. So here it is. Now, if I do a save to server, now I'm going to say, hey, take what I've made, changes I've made, and push it to the server. And like everything else in a revision control system, it has release notes. So you should always put down what you change, because again, the life cycle history will indicate what that change was, which is really important. And there's also some advanced things here too, but at this point, these things should have been changed over here in the name and the description. Again, you can't really change what's going to go on over here. Now, if it was a two-stage thing, there'd probably be a little more detail as to which revision would it be, like major or minor, or which level you were going to change there. But this is a single level, so that's what it's going to look like. That's a preview of it. I'm not going to save, well, actually, I will save this up. I'm going to save for demonstration because I want to show you what happens. And I'll press OK. So if I go back over here to my Explorer panel, you'll notice now, and I believe this was this one here, okay, you'll see that this was in production, and now I'm in Rev 4, and I'm now back at draft. So what happened? Unlike when we're using Word or something that is not under revision control, every time we save those things, they get stomped on, right? If you're working on some Word doc and you keep saving it, you're constantly stomping over the old one and putting the new one in. That's not what happens in a revision control system. In a revision control system, you create a new file. The old file is still here. So as a matter of fact, we don't see it. Let me see if this will work here. I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to turn this back on and see if it works here. Show hidden revisions. And if I do this, let me just do it here. Sometimes I get to work. I'm going to do a search on it. You should find it just as fast. So if we go here and 006-0004, we'll bring this up. And then I should see the other ones. No? Okay, I missed a 0. Let's put that in there. Okay, there we go. So I actually see all the revisions of this particular version. What I wanted to show you is that notice that revision 3 is still under production. So the life cycle does not travel with the component. The life cycle is, in this case, the file. It's not going to travel with the file. So when I created revision 4, this is considered by the system to be a new file, and it starts back at draft. And if I go in to do a life cycle change here, go into operations, change state, and I bump this here to 4, and let's say example, it's going to have no bearing on any of the other things that we have in here. Okay, so we'll see that here in just a moment. And you can see here that number 4, the -4 version of this, is just now prototype. So that's the thing to keep in mind with the life cycle. The life cycle is specific to that particular file, where the revision is a change or a creation of a new file because there was some type of a change made to the file, or just simply pushed to the server. So hopefully that gives you some clarification between the two of them. So with that being said, let me jump back to the folders, because the next thing that I want to talk about here is the folder structure. And we've kind of seen this here already. Hopefully getting a little bit of a feel for what you're seeing here. The folder structure acts a lot like the folder structure you'd find in your operating system. But there's a difference to that. What Altium has done is these folders here represent the type of file that is supposed to exist within it. Okay? So I'm going to, for example, I'm going to go into inductors and I'm going to click on properties here. And if you notice in the properties of this, there are these folder types. Now this one's set to component, but the reason I bring this up is I want to show you all the different folder types there are here. And there's quite a few of them in here. And I want to talk about a few of them that I think will be of interest to you. One of them is a generic folder. So there is a folder that you can have, it's generic. In fact, if you look over here under models, they use a generic folder. They also use generic folders for components and my demonstration folder and managed content. It is really what I'll call a structural folder. It is there to assist with the structure that you have here. And as a matter of fact, even the Altium provided components, this one could have been a generic folder. Can you store stuff into it? Yes. Can you create things in it? No. You can move, but you can move things into it. But the intention was not to really store things in this folder. It's really just to help organize the branching of your directory or folder system. We talked about components. You've seen these over here, your footprints and symbols. The binary file is a directory that was created for all those things that you got to add to a project that are not specific to Altium's use, like a PowerPoint presentation, Excel sheet, a Word doc, even a PDF, right? These are things that Altium knows about in the sense that it can provide links or open those products up for you, but Altium itself will not use a Word doc. It will not use an Excel sheet. So that's why they have these here, because they know that you will have those type of files associated with the project. So you have these things called binary files. There's also another one that they added in here, and I'm still on the fence about it. Maybe I just haven't seen a use case that will really sell me on it. But they also have 3D models. So if you're familiar with libraries, you normally have to embed 3D model into the footprint. You don't have to do that anymore. You can actually link it. That's what this is here for. But I'm going to be honest with you, unless you're using something over and over and over again, I'm not sure the link is going to be of much value. I just find that with a lot of libraries, especially footprints, they're so specific that it's just probably just better to embed it anyways. So that's kind of my take on this here. Again, I don't know of a use case that could really sell me on it just yet. There are other ones in here too. I'm not going to go through all of them just because it would just take quite a bit of time. But the other one that we'll talk about here in a little bit is the component templates. You may have not seen those before because this is relatively specific to Concord Pro, Nexus, Altium 365. And it's kind of a neat feature that they do provide with the tool. So that's what you've got. But the fact is that the structure is made out of these folders, and these folders have very specific types for the types of files that Altium uses. Now, the properties can change a little bit. Most of them will have the following three things. They'll have the folder name, which you can give as you see fit. They'll have folder type, which obviously you just do the drop down and select the one you want. And then there's going to be an item naming scheme. So the item naming scheme is definitely important because that is what we see over here, and this assists with driving it, though there's other ways of doing it, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. There is also the component template too. So if I am creating a new inductor and I click on add component up here, when you click on that, Altium's going to go to the properties of the folder, says, aha, you have a component template that is associated with this directory, and I'm going to take the information from there and I'm going to put it into the component editor. And we'll see this here again in a few minutes. There's also the configure parameters ability on add, which is a part of this component template as well. So we're not going to really delve into this part here. The point I'm trying to make is that you create these folders, you create and you establish them based on the type of directory they need to assist. So here's another example. Here's the footprint. So if I right click into here, you'll see that the properties are specific to the folder name, the folder type, and the item naming scheme. And that's how most of them are going to look anyways. But when you do the add footprint, if in this case we don't have a component template, so it's going to grab this item naming scheme down here. So hopefully I've given you an idea of how this is set up. And again, I encourage you to take a look at what Altium's done. I really think that this is a very optimal way of doing this. Now, if you're in a really large company and you need to break this down further, feel free to do so. You could easily have another set of folders that represent larger let's say, divisions of things. Like maybe you've got so many discretes that you have a folder called discretes, and another one called ICs, and another one called connectors. You could easily break this down into something a little more specific if you really needed to do so. So there hopefully gives you an idea of what you want to do with those. But when you do set up these folders, you definitely have to get into those properties, because you're going to give it a name and what I want in a folder type. And let me now talk about the naming scheme. So the naming scheme here, the item naming scheme. Got to remember that this is a database, and the rule of a database is that you have to have a key field. Well, the revision ID, or basically really the revision, the item ID, this is the combination of the two. But the item ID, let's bring that up here, is really the name. It's the key field that represents that particular file. And as a matter of fact, because of this, though I don't really encourage it because there's some issues when you need to bring things out, you can have the same name for multiple parts, because it's the item ID that differentiates it. And that's what you see. Well, you don't see it over here, but let's say I had 5 or 6 parts and they were all just called 10K. You could have that in these systems because their IDs would be different, but their names could be the same. So where do the IDs come from? Well, there's 3 main sources that I know about. So one of them does come from the properties. When you're creating a new, let's go back into its properties here. So if I go into let's go into the file properties. Let's go into this one here. So when you create a new one, it could pull it from the item naming scheme. If you have a component template associated with it, it will pull it from the component template. If you migrate these components, so there's a migration feature where you take your components and you bring them into your Altium 365 or your Concord Pro, then you can also change the ID that way as well. So those are 3 times in which you can influence the ID. So that's why it's kind of important to keep an eye on this. Now, what does the ID have to be? Well, it can be whatever you want it to be. So though I say keep it simple. Now, here is an example of what Altium provides by default. So they're saying $_content_type_code. And then there is an actual code that they provide over here. This is actually fixed. And then anything in the curly brackets represents the number of placeholders. So what does this really mean? Well, content type code is a feature in Altium that says if you use this and you're using, for example, this is for a component, it will use CMP. If you're doing it for a footprint, let's go to footprint and go to its properties, its content type code is actually going to be PCC. So you can use this and you can follow suit with Altium has. Now, if you don't like, for example, this content type code over here, then you can change it. You can say, you know what, I don't like PCC, I want FPT, and you can do that. Now, if you don't want to have this 001 in here, maybe you just don't want to have it that long, can you delete it? Sure, you can keep it that simple. Maybe if you want, you can add in another 0. That's what the item naming scheme is all about, is making it so that it will work for you. Now, I've seen different ways of people doing it, and you can follow Altium's recommendations, but I'm going to really be honest with you. This is really that KISS thing, keep it simple, stupid type of thing. I really recommend you keep it simple. I've seen people come up with very elaborate ones, and in the end, it really becomes difficult to manage. And you got to remember this, that once this scheme has been given to a file, you cannot change it. So if I did something here where somehow I did not follow my naming convention, like in fact, you see an example here. So Altium didn't always follow the same convention here. So what can you do about it? And the answer is really very little. Now, if you catch it after you've made the file, you can clone the file. And because you've cloned it, you'll have a copy of it. And then you can, at that point, you give it the proper ID and then delete the old file. But a lot of times we don't catch that in time. A lot of times we have somebody who's gone in there, they create it, and then they put it in a project. And once it's in a project, you're not going to be able to get rid of it. And so at that point, you're really stuck with it. So I just prefer to have, as much as I'd like to keep this really pristine and have ones that say like, hey, if this is the inductor category, then here's inductor dash the number, or this is the fuse category, and this will be fuse dash the number. You can do that. But you remember, there's other places where these IDs can come in, or they built it in the wrong location, right? Like they didn't realize they're in the diode directory, they hit add component, they create this, oh, I created this, wait a minute, this is a fuse. Well, guess what? The ID will be the diode ID. So yes, you can move it into the fuse, but you're gonna have this odd duct sticking out over there that's got a diode tag on it, not a fuse tag. I'm just, as I said, I found it just to be just as simple, just to say, for example, component dash, have your curly brackets with, let's say, 5 or 6 placeholders in it, and be on your way, and that should work out just fine. Okay, so I think it hopefully gives you an idea about the revision IDs. Now, if you've already done something pretty elaborate with it, so be it, right? It's not going to be the end of the world. Yeah, you know, I think the one advantage that you would have if you did use something where it's like, you know what, I've got diode dash and then the unique number, or fuse dash and the unique number. One thing it can kind of help out with is if you do a search for something, let's say you're looking for a footprint and you want to know which, which components have used it, then it makes it really easy to look down the revision IDs like, oh, that was a diode component that used it. Oh, that was a fuse component that used it. But it's not like you don't have other columns that would also provide that information as well. Your description can certainly do it. Your component type will certainly do it as well, which brings me to component types. So this is another thing to consider, though it's probably one of the easiest things to set up. So what's a component type anyways? It's really simple. It helps Altium to identify what component type it is so that it can quickly search for things. And as a matter of fact, it comes with a Altium already comes with a pretty comprehensive list. So if I go back into my data management here, and I go into component types, you'll see that there's already a bunch of them that are set up. And more often what I see happen, especially during migrations, people don't know what that component type means or what implication it has, so they'll create their own, but really what they're doing is they'll duplicate one that Altium's already created. So what is its purpose? Again, for search mechanisms. So if you just simply say, hey, this component is, if it's a resistor, said, hey, this component's a resistor, then Altium knows to search that area of the database specifically for resistors. So it's going to speed up the search process. It also knows which template or templates have been associated with it. Okay? And it knows which folders that the resistors are going to find their way into as well. So there's very little work that has to be done on this. Sometimes you may have to create a new component type, and there's permissions that you can set so that that's only given to the administrators to do that. But that's what the component type is, just to help with the search. And as we saw in that example, I already closed it off, but if I open up any one of these, actually, if I do this, look at its properties, it should show it. Yeah, it does it. Let's go to advanced. And yeah, oddly enough, I don't see the one, but I do see the fact it's over here. So under this one is component type diode. So it's been established for that. Where if I go into integrated circuits and I bring up select columns and we go into our component type, let's see what this one is. We'll press OK. So yeah, so this is under the component type integrated circuits. Now, one other thing I'll mention as well, if I wanted to do a group edit, I can do group edits as well, but it's going to be a different editor. And if I was to hold down my key, my shift key and mouse click, and I right click and I say edit 6 revisions, this component type is really important in addition to the template. So usually the component type and the template are tightly combined together. The reason why this is important is that if these weren't all the same, like maybe 3 of them were called IC and the other ones are called integrated circuit, when I do edit 6 revisions, Altium will open up 2 editors. It'll open up one for the integrated circuit, and it'll open up the other one for the ICs. So that's why it's really important this component type stays consistent. And the reason it wants to do that is because it wants to make sure that the parameters that it's showing are consistent. So that's probably the only catch with this. You want to keep it's pretty easy to keep it consistent because Altium's already given you a good list of them. So with that being said, hopefully you kind of see that all these things are leading up to what this thing is called the component template. So Altium does provide component templates. They're actually pretty easy to make because they are a byproduct of the migration. So if you set up your migration properly with all the parameters that you want and you import them in, Altium will automatically create you a component template, which is really cool. And there's a few modifications you may want to make to it, but that's what it is. Now, Altium also provides them as well. If you want to take a look here, we're going to go under what's called Manage Content and under Templates. So they do provide examples, which I'd encourage you to take a look at. But under the component templates, we're going to see all the ones that were created for all of these folders that you see over here. And again, I'm going to stick with inductors just because it's just familiar with it at this point. But let's go into the inductors one. They're all going to look the same, honestly. So I'm going to go there and I'm going to right click and edit so we can take a look at it. So what does this component template look like? Well, it's going to be a big review of everything we've seen before. Well, what do we see here? We see our life cycle definition. So you want to establish a life cycle definition before you get to this point. Revision naming, which scheme do you want to use? Again, something that has to be set up from the get-go. You don't want to set this up as a post-thought. Your component naming. And so if you want, especially for components, if you want this to be the driving force, this component template to be the driving force, this is where you would set it up and which folder you want to put it in. Now, in terms of the overrides, I have mixed feelings about it. I think sometimes you do have to do an override. It's because you may have just at the last minute you realize this is not the one I want to use, or I started this in the wrong location and I don't want to, I want to make sure I fix this up. There could be some reasons for having the overrides enabled here. So I'll leave that up to you as to determining whether you want those or not. Down below, we have our parameters. What's cool about this is that you can also associate a default footprint and a default symbol. And that's what you see over here. So if I was to use this one, then this symbol over here is the default one that will be used. You also have your other parameters here as well. Notice something that they've got. They also have different types of types. So in the past, we always used strings. We're stuck with strings. But what Altium understood was that the problem with strings, especially with search mechanisms, is doing it based on ASCII code and not based on an actual value. So they do allow you to change these to certain values. Now, I like them and I don't because yes, for search purposes, you can definitely search on value. However, this will not, like for example, if you have value here in Henry's, you cannot put 10 UH. It'll scream at you. It doesn't want that. It wants 10 because this has already been set to Henry's. So you have to basically make sure that you give it the appropriate number. So it's a little persnickety that way. So if you have a percentage, you don't actually put the percent sign in it. Or if you have Celsius, you don't put the C in there. That's kind of what works. So it's an advantage and disadvantage. I personally find it frustrating, so I just leave everything as text, but you can certainly do it this way. Do you want it to be visible? Do you want things to be read-only? So you can establish things in this that are going to be in there, but it's going to be read-only. And for some companies, they do want that. Like, hey, like when you use this, there are certain things we need to have in here that are associated with this that we don't want you to mess with. If you want it to be required, so you will not be able to save this to server. It will flag it and say you've got to fill this in order for this to, in order for you to successfully save it to the server. You can put in default values if you want. There's also a description here, and description is really kind of cool. I really wish that Altium would make this available when you actually create the component so you know what to put in here. My biggest concern with any type of library system is a blank field. If I don't know what to put in there, then either I'm going to leave it blank or I'm going to put it in wrong. And that's really the biggest problem with a lot of these things, which, as we've talked about in prior webinars. So there you go. There's this here. So just to demonstrate this, I'll leave this one up. I'm going to go back over here to my Explorer panel, and under my Explorer panel, I'm going to go back into inductors. And here I'm going to click on Add Component. And you'll see that when I click on this, the information that was in the template finds its way into the component. So there you go. So here's the template. Here's the new component. So keep in mind, these are the things that should have found their way in there. And not everything was a text value, so this list might look a little bit smaller. But keep in mind, there was a prompt for a PCB footprint, which we didn't fill in, but we did have a prompt for a symbol, which happens to be under the revision state of deleted. So oddly enough, if I try to save this, it won't allow it because this state doesn't allow, remember when we go back to life cycles, a deleted state for this particular life cycle will not allow this to become part of a new revision. So I would have to be able to change that, and I can. It's just really a matter of clicking here, and I can either I can edit it straight up, and it'll bring up the schematic editor, or I can remove this one, and I can select a new model in there. So I've got options to do that. Of course, I can also select the footprint as well. But everything you see in here is based off of the information in this template. Now, the other thing too is notice the default names, the CMP-006, and then the number. We go over here under advanced settings. There it is, comp006, and this would be the new number that would be assigned to it. And what I have found with Altium is if something does get deleted or you're able to delete it, it's not always that you can, but if it gets deleted, let's say I deleted number 7 out of this, Altium will go back and fill in number 7 with this with this over here. So it doesn't leave numbers that have been removed unused. It will go back and say, oh, the first one in the list is now number 7, and it will fill that in. So just take note of that. The last thing I'm going to mention here with the time that we've got is permissions. So everything I've shown you has some level of permissions to it. And we'll go over here back into our preferences. I'm waiting for it to come up here. And I'm going to go back into our servers. I'm going to go into properties, and I'm going to go into operations. These are all the things that you can control. Now, I know it looks like a big list, and you're like, oh my gosh, what is this all about? But we've actually seen a lot of these things. And a lot of them you can just set to administrator or to specific people who should have rights to make these configurations. So component types, we just talked about earlier. These are the predefined list of things that you can associate your parts to. Or like if you have an inductor, you associate to the inductor. If it's a resistor, you associate to inductor. Again, for search. So if you want, you can add, edit, and delete. So you want to give permissions to that. Life cycle definitions. If you only want your administrators, add, edit, and delete. I'll talk about this one in a minute. Revision, add, edit, and delete. For even deleting things. So as I said, even if you give everybody the right to delete things, it's not easy to delete things. If a symbol's been used in a component, then the symbol cannot be deleted. If that component's been used in a project, that component cannot be deleted. So you can see that there's a lot of reliance on situations over here. Sometimes you do want something deleted, like it could be like, oh man, I really screwed this file up from the get-go, and I haven't linked it to anything or associated it to anything, so maybe I want to delete it. Other times, you know, maybe you just want to leave well enough alone and just bump the revision. And that happens quite often as well. As a matter of fact, what we do with the prior revisions, in some companies, we create what's called a boneyard. So we have a bunch of symbols that get created, and we don't want those symbols anymore, but they've been used in a project. We can associate new symbols to those components, but those old symbols still exist. We just throw them in a folder called the boneyard. We can't do anything about them. We can obsolete them, but we can't delete them because they were used in a prior project. So that's what happens with a revision control system. The rest of these are just things like components or footprints or symbols. Do you want people to have the ability to, create, edit, and save to the server? And those are the type of things that you would have to take a look at over here. And then lastly, who can do it? You can have two things. You can either do it based on the owner, whoever owns this, or primarily it's the role or the user. So the owner is usually the one who creates it, but the one is the role is anybody who has a login to the system. Or pardon me, I take that back. The user is anybody who has a login to the system. The role, you can create these groups. Like you can have an administrator group, and there can be multiple users within the administrator. So that's probably one of the very first things that you'll set up anyways when you do it. So I think I covered everything here. So my last thoughts on this, I'm going to cancel this here. I've thrown a lot at you. Something to consider here. The thing that I encourage you to do, and I'm going to cancel here and show you what I've done, because I do this often. I want to know what's going to happen down the road. And I think this is important for people to try. So create yourself a folder. I call it what you want. I call mine Proving Grounds. You can call it Sandbox, whatever you want to do. And don't necessarily link to things that are already in here, because then obviously you're going to kind of create a tangled web. But you can clone things. You can go into, let's say, connectors here, and you can right click and you go operations, you can clone. And when you clone it, it creates a new file. Take that file, bring it into your Proving Grounds or to whatever you want to call it. See what happens to things. What happens when I change the life cycle? What happens when I change the revision? What happens when I place this onto a schematic? Can I delete it, right? Those are the kind of things that I think are important for people to try, because all too often we set this up and it looks great from the get-go, but then we start finding all these little issues that we did not know about from the very beginning. So got that here. If you don't mind, I'd just like to talk a moment or two about 9.connects. So I'm gonna just bring this up here for a moment. So you're here for a reason. Why are you here? Well, probably one of three reasons. You are thinking of using one of these products. As a matter of fact, 50% of you are currently contemplating the use of one of these products, or you've purchased it and you're just not even sure where to start. And we know a lot of people are like, hey, this looks really cool, and I want to look like that end product that Altium has. I don't even know where to begin. And I get it, because we learned the hard way as well too, right? Where do you start with this and to get it right? or you're knee deep in it and you're just kind of looking for ways to improve it. Well, we went down this path and okay, we made our mistakes, but you know what? It's in motion and we don't want to burn it to the ground, start it again. But on the other hand, are there things we can do to possibly improve it? So who are we here at 9.Connects? We do training, we do services, and what I'm going to talk about is what I'll call our platform services. It's just a term I came up with because I didn't want to keep rattling off all the different things that Altium makes, like 365 and Concord Pro. I guess I'm rattling them off anyways. So what do we provide? Well, we can provide configuration assistance, which you see today. We do provide to a number of our customers. Library scrubbing. So one thing I didn't really emphasize here, which is really important, is that when it comes to your parts, garbage in, garbage out. You don't want to bring in parts that are not clean, or let's put it this way: what you see is what you're going to get. So there's no annealing capabilities or things that are going to improve your libraries if they're already missing information. And once you bring into a revision control system, it's going to make it even harder because every change you make is going to create a rev bump. And with every rev bump, you're just filling in the database with more and more dead files. So really want to make sure that you get it right the first time, so that when you do bring it in, it's ready to go either by revision 1 or by revision 2. Sometimes there's little things that get missed or things we got to just change within the system, but we don't want you to be on revision 15 by the time you're done cleaning it up. Library migration assistance, so we can assist you with getting the files in a manner that we think works best for getting them imported into Concord Pro or Altium 365, whatever tool that you are using of the Altium product line. And we can also assist with training. And that's a big thing too, because you may get it and you set this up and you've done a beautiful job. But if you have people who don't understand this, they're going to treat a lot of your libraries like symbol-centric libraries, and they're going to keep reintroducing symbols that you already have. And you're going to have to keep on going into those components and cleaning up the components, which bump the revisions. And then you're going to have to take those symbols and you're going to have to throw them in some boneyard, especially if they've already used it in a project. So training is really imperative here because everybody's got to understand how the library mechanism works. And procedural documentation, so helping those who need some documentation, we can certainly assist with that. That's probably the hardest thing, is that, yeah, we got it set up, but now we got to make sure everybody knows what to do. And so the documentation we can assist with. For more information, do check us out here on our website. And under this, we have one called Engineering Services on our top banner. And then you can see Concord Pro Vault Setup. So we do provide some examples of ones we've seen. And though I will tell you that I think the Altium one that you will get by default is a really good one to consider. So there you go with that.